Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really diving into something complex. The geopolitical currents, the forces that seem to be driving this evolving isolation of Israel.
Yeah, it's a good topic.
We've all seen the headlines, right? The UN votes, the diplomatic spats. It feels intense right now.
Oh, yeah.
But is this really new? Our mission today is to zoom out a bit. We're leaning on some really insightful analysis from Mookie Tenenbaum to understand the historical patterns here.
Exactly. And crucially, to figure out what makes this current wave feel so different.
Right. And who are the players? What are the self-interests driving it now?
That's it. The analysis we're using, especially drawing from that conversation with Mookie Tenenbaum, it really pushes back on the idea that this is just about recent events.
So it's deeper.
It suggests there's almost a pattern, maybe hardwired into the country's existence. Tenenbaum really digs into this fundamental question. Why does this small nation so often find itself at odds with, well, the global consensus?
Okay. And what's different now? What economic, military, diplomatic forces are making this moment feel so acutely isolating?
It's a real study in those global pressures versus, I suppose, national resilience.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Because you can't really get the present if you don't see that this isolation thing, it's not new for Israel. It's got history,
Oh, absolutely.
a precedent.
We have to go way back.
Okay.
1948, the state is born, and what happens? Bam! Global freeze. A nearly complete arms embargo.
What was
now.
an incredibly stark moment, profound abandonment, really. You had this tiny population, maybe 600,000 people.
Tiny.
And on the other side, Arab nations, maybe 100 million combined population, attacking from all sides. And their stated goal, I mean, it was explicit. Wipe the new state off the map.
And the world just watched. Didn't step in, didn't arm them.
Nope. They actively refused military aid. The only country, and this was unofficial, that managed to get weapons through was Czechoslovakia.
Just one.
Just one. The expectation really was that Israel wouldn't last the week. But they won.
Against all odds. And, kind of ironically, they actually expanded their territory slightly. That first victory, winning when completely isolated, it set a theme. Survival means relying on yourself.
That definitely sets a tone. But things did change, didn't they? Temporarily, at least in the 60s, there was this period of outreach.
Yeah, a deliberate diplomatic push. They focused heavily on Africa, on the newly independent nations there.
Smart move.
Very smart foreign policy. They realized, I think, that military strength alone wasn't enough. So they used their practical know-how, agriculture, water management, that sort of thing.
Stuff they were good at.
Exactly. They sent teams, helped develop farming techniques across Africa, and that built real relationships. It expanded their international footprint in a way that just hadn't been possible before. They were actively trying to break that diplomatic siege.
And that momentum and that diplomatic high point came just before the next big conflict, right? 1967, the Six-Day War.
Ah, yes. 1967, a strategic masterclass, militarily speaking. But the geopolitical fallout was huge.
What happened exactly?
Well, they took out the air forces of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan on the ground in about 25 minutes.
Oh, wow. 25 minutes.
The war itself, over in 6 days. And Israel's territory quadrupled. Now, that kind of decisive, overwhelming success, it has this strange effect.
How so?
Well, the analysis points out success tends to attract those who like the strong. There was this brief moment of increased respect, maybe recognition.
But that strength or the perception of it didn't last long against economic pressure, did it? The 1973 Yom Kippur War. Israel won militarily again, eventually, but it triggered the most effective isolation yet.
Exactly right. Egypt and Syria launched this coordinated invasion. And the Arab world's response wasn't just military aid, it was economic warfare. The oil embargo.
The big one.
The big one.
Yeah.
Aimed at anyone supporting Israel. And you have to remember, back then, the global economy was utterly hooked on Middle Eastern oil.
And Israel itself was different then economically. We think of it now as this tech hub, right?
Yeah.
Silicon Wadi.
Oh, completely different. Back in the early 70s, primarily agrarian, the analysis actually calls it a citrus power.
Citrus power, like oranges.
Literally. Its main export was oranges.
Yeah.
Maybe some light manufacturing, but nothing the world really depended on. So when that oil embargo hit, total vulnerability.
Right.
European economies just tanked. They had to make choices fast.
And those choices were?
The diplomatic fallout was immediate. Dramatic. All those African countries they'd built ties with in the 60s cut relations, just like that.
Wow.
European nations, terrified of freezing in the dark, economic collapse, they cooled relations way down. Isolation came back with a vengeance. That oil weapon turned out to be way more powerful than any diplomatic protest.
But there were exceptions. Two staunch allies held out.
Yeah, the U.S., obviously.
Mm.
And, interestingly, Holland, the Netherlands.
Holland. Why them, specifically in Europe?
Well, it came down to geology, really. They had their own significant natural gas reserves domestically.
Ah, self-sufficiency.
Pretty much. They basically survived the crisis by telling other European countries, look, you want our gas, give us oil. It was pure national self-interest dictating policy. It let them stay aligned with Israel without facing immediate economic ruin.
But for Israel, the overall effect was years of trying to claw back diplomatic ground.
Years. It really only started turning around properly with the Camp David Accords with Egypt in '77. But that whole cycle, isolation, slow recovery, isolation, again, that's absolutely crucial context for what we're seeing today.
That history is definitely vital. Okay, let's widen the view now. If Israel's in an isolated phase now, how does this stack up against other nations that have faced international isolation? We need to compare. The analysis brings up North Korea, South Africa, Taiwan.
Right, and doing that comparison really throws Israel's current situation into sharp relief. It's unique.
How so? Let's start with North Korea.
Okay, North Korea, that's kind of the textbook example of a self-isolated state, isn't it? Almost entirely cut off, global embargo. Basically, only China is a major partner. But what happened?
Well, you'd think sanctions would crush them.
And yeah, quality of life suffers massively, no doubt. But strategically, North Korea used that isolation to double down on self-reliance, especially militarily. Despite everything, they developed ballistic missiles, nuclear weapons, even hydrogen bombs.
So isolation didn't make them weak, necessarily.
Not strategically weak, no. It forced them to channel everything into becoming self-sufficient in weapons. It's a key point. Severe isolation doesn't automatically mean powerlessness. Sometimes it forces a state to become dangerous in new ways.
Okay, then there's apartheid South Africa. A completely different reason for isolation.
Totally different. Not military aggression, but pure institutionalized racism. You had this tiny white minority ruling over a huge black majority, sometimes like 10-1. The world condemned it on ethical grounds.
But the sanctions, they didn't work right away, did they?
No, for a long time, the international embargoes were, frankly, pretty ineffective. The moral outrage was there, but the economic bite was blunted.
Why was that?
Commodities. South Africa was sitting on a gold mine, literally. Gold, diamonds, precious stones, stuff the world needed, or at least really wanted.
Ah, so global demand shielded them.
For a long time, yes. Nations needed those resources, so it diluted the impact of the political sanctions. It wasn't really until global political will properly shifted in the late 80s that the pressure became unbearable.
And what happened after apartheid ended?
Well, the economic story afterwards is complicated. The analysis points out that the devastation wasn't just from sanctions, but also from really disastrous policies and mismanagement by the new leadership, like the ongoing electricity crisis there. That's a direct legacy of that period.
Oh, wait, the third case, Taiwan. This one's fascinating because the isolation story is almost flipped on its head.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Taiwan's isolation kind of started because they were the ones doing the isolating initially. After the Chinese Civil War, the nationalists fled to Taiwan, Formosa then, and claimed they were the real China, the Republic of China.
And they held the UN seat for years.
Exactly. They held China's seat, isolating the mainland PRC diplomatically. But, the power dynamic shifted.
As mainland China got stronger.
Precisely. The PRC grew economically, militarily, and they started putting the squeeze on everyone. Choose. Recognize Beijing or recognize Taipei. Not both. Eventually, Taiwan got pushed out, diplomatically isolated, only recognized by a handful of small countries, relied on these representative offices everywhere else.
But today, they wield massive power, way beyond their official diplomatic status.
And that power comes down to one thing, really. Technology. Specifically, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
A chip giant.
The undisputed chip giant. They make the advanced chips that run everything. AI, phones, cars, military systems. That gives them incredible geopolitical leverage.
The analysis mentioned an example.
Yeah, a really powerful recent one. South Africa, apparently under pressure from China, tried to downgrade Taiwan's representative office in Pretoria.
And Taiwan pushed back?
Immediately. And their leverage wasn't tanks or treaties, it was chips. They basically threatened a chip embargo.
Seriously?
Essentially said, we make the brains for your entire tech sector. You downgrade us, we cut you off. And South Africa, needing those components for, well, everything, backed down instantly.
Wow.
And Mookie Tenenbaum really highlights this point. Taiwan's technological indispensability makes its political isolation almost irrelevant in key moments. Their leverage is structural.
Okay, so looking at these three, North Korea weaponizing itself, South Africa shielded by commodities, Taiwan wielding tech power, none of them quite fit Israel's current mold, do they?
No, it seems like Israel's situation is more of a hybrid. It has this historical political antagonism, but it's also a rising tech and military power
Yeah.
itself. It's a different, maybe more complex dynamic. The political condemnation is high, but as we'll get into, the strategic reliance on Israeli tech is also growing. It's messy.
Right. Okay, let's get into the why then. What's driving this current wave of isolation, this intense anti-Israel sentiment? Especially when, as you mentioned, other global conflicts with maybe higher death tolls get far less attention. Theory A connects it to success and anti-Semitism.
Yeah, this is probably the trickiest theory. It suggests that anti-Semitism isn't constant. It flows in waves. And paradoxically, these waves often seem to correlate with perceived Jewish success or the success and power of the State of Israel.
And the counterexample often cited is right after the Holocaust.
Exactly. The analysis notes that after the Holocaust, when Jews were undeniably victims on a horrific scale, open anti-Semitism became, almost taboo in polite society.
Yeah.
The victim status acted as a kind of moral shield.
But now, with Israel seen as a strong military and economic power,
That latent hatred, the theory goes, finds a new, more acceptable outlet.
which often gets labeled anti-Zionism.
Right. And while legitimate political criticism of any state, including Israel, is valid, this argument suggests that anti-Zionism frequently serves as a cover for old-school anti-Semitism. You see it in the real world, Jews feeling unsafe wearing a kippah in parts of Europe, the harassment on campuses worldwide.
So the hypothesis is the recent decisive military actions might have sort of uncorked this latent sentiment, shifting the narrative from victim to perceived aggressor, making Israel an easier target for global anger.
That's the idea. And the evidence offered is the selectivity. Look at the constant UN focus, the media storm around Gaza, versus the relative silence on, say, Sudan.
Where the death toll is staggering and starvation is rampant.
Exactly. Why the laser focus on one conflict? The theory suggests it's not just about the events themselves, but about this underlying dynamic where success or perceived strength triggers a backlash rooted in something older and uglier.
Okay, that's one challenging theory. What's the second major driver proposed? The proportionality argument.
Ah, yes, a debate over proportionality. This is huge in shaping public opinion. The argument against Israel is essentially that the response to the October 7th attacks is excessive, disproportionate. You hear the line, killing tens of thousands to save a few dozen hostages. That narrative fuels a lot of the global outrage.
But Tenenbaum's analysis offers a different way to think about proportionality itself, right? A conceptual reframing.
It really does. It argues that the way proportionality is often demanded in this context, an eye for an eye, kill for kill, is fundamentally about vengeance, not justice.
Okay, explain that distinction. Vengeance versus justice.
Think about it like this. If I harm you, and you harm me back in exactly the same measure, that's vengeance. It's primitive, symmetrical retribution. Justice, though, especially in a legal or state context, aims for something different,
Like what?
like removing the threat, preventing future harm. Look at domestic law. When we imprison a violent criminal, the main goal isn't revenge, it's to protect society, to stop them from doing it again.
Okay.
So applying that logic, Israel's stated goal after the horrors of October 7th isn't just revenge, it's justice in the sense of preventing recurrence. It's about dismantling the entity responsible, Hamas, to stop such an attack from ever happening again. That goal, focused on prevention, is inherently at odds with the demand for vengeance measured by a simple body count comparison.
That's a really important distinction. Prevention versus retribution. It definitely changes the ethical framing, though obviously doesn't erase the human cost.
Absolutely not. And speaking of that cost, there are two crucial caveats the analysis always brings up. First, Israel claims its ratio of civilian to combatant deaths is the lowest in modern urban warfare history, though that's heavily disputed, of course.
And the second caveat.
Critically, the casualty figures themselves, the numbers, the ages, all the data driving the headlines, are provided solely by Hamas.
Which is a designated terrorist group.
Exactly. So any discussion about proportionality has to acknowledge that the primary source of data is one of the belligerents and one with a clear propaganda interest. That data reliability issue is fundamental.
And while all this external pressure and isolation is happening, what's the feeling inside Israel?
Overwhelming resolve, it seems. The sources suggest something like 80% of Israelis support finishing the operation in Gaza, quote, at any cost.
At any cost. That's
Yeah.
strong.
It reflects, I think, the profound trauma and the feeling of existential threat after October 7th The breaching of defenses, the mass murder, the kidnappings, the documented torture, it was unprecedented.
So if there's that level of internal unity,
It means that external diplomatic pressure, the isolation, might actually backfire politically. If the population sees it as pressure to basically accept an ongoing threat to their existence, they're likely to dig in deeper, regardless of what the UN says.
okay. So the reasons for the isolation are complex history, anti-Semitism maybe, this whole debate about justice versus vengeance. That brings us to maybe the most provocative question. Cui bono? Who actually benefits from Israel being isolated right now?
Right. And this is where Mookie Tenenbaum's analysis throws a real curveball. The suggestion is the primary beneficiary might be the United States.
Wait, the U.S.? That sounds totally backwards. They give billions in aid, provide diplomatic cover, wield the UN veto. How does isolating their main ally in the region possibly help them?
It's about managing a very powerful, sometimes unpredictable asset. Think about it. Israel isn't just a small country. It's a technological giant, a military giant, nuclear-capable, cyber powerhouse, defense innovator.
Okay.
The U.S., aiming to maintain its own influence and stability in the region, doesn't necessarily want Israel to become completely independent, strategically or technologically. If Israel feels isolated, if it constantly needs U.S. diplomatic backup at the UN, if it needs that security guarantee,
It stays dependent. The isolation acts like a leash.
that's the argument, a subtle geopolitical leash.
Yeah.
The U.S. remains the indispensable partner, which gives Washington leverage over Israel's actions, the pace, the scope. If Israel were fully accepted everywhere, had normal relations worldwide, it would have far more freedom of action, less need to coordinate with the U.S. This forced dependency keeps them reliant on U.S. arms, U.S. aid, U.S. diplomacy. It reinforces American influence.
Wow, okay, if that's the lens, then the recent moves by European countries, they look different. This rush by France, Spain, Germany, the UK to recognize a Palestinian state, even though functionally it doesn't really exist.
The analysis pretty much calls those cheap political moves. Look, European leaders are facing huge problems at home right now. Economic worries, energy costs, social tensions, domestic unrest, often involving significant minority populations with strong views on this conflict.
So recognizing Palestine is a distraction.
It's low-cost, high-visibility politics. It makes leaders look decisive on the world stage, costs them basically nothing tangible because they're recognizing something that isn't a functioning state, but it plays well domestically.
Yeah.
It appeases certain voting blocs and shifts focus from problems at home.
And crucially, you're saying the U.S. hasn't really pushed back hard against these European moves.
Not significantly, no. Think about other issues where the U.S. wants Europe to fall in line, trade disputes, policy towards China, Russia sanctions. Washington can apply serious pressure when it wants to. Tariffs, linking trade deals, diplomatic muscle.
But not this time.
But not really this time. They've expressed mild disagreement, perhaps, but haven't put real weight behind stopping it. And that inaction lends weight to the theory that maybe this European isolation of Israel isn't entirely unwelcome in Washington. Maybe it serves that purpose of maintaining dependency.
Let's shift from states to other actors. What about corporations? And the Jewish diaspora? It's complicated territory.
Hugely complicated. For Jewish communities outside Israel, there's always this background fear of feeding anti-Semitic tropes, the global cabal controlling things narrative.
Right, so they have to be careful about appearing too unified or powerful in their support for Israel.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance. But at the same time, you do see direct corporate actions that contribute to the isolation. The Microsoft example is pretty stark.
What happened there?
Microsoft reportedly froze access to its cloud services for the Israeli military.
That's a massive deal for military operations.
Huge security implications. And the irony, as the analysis notes, is that Microsoft's former CEO, Steve Ballmer, is Jewish. But clearly, the company felt enough pressure, maybe internal, maybe external, to take an action that directly impacts a major client in a conflict zone. It shows the pressure isn't just coming from governments.
And Hollywood, always a political battlefield.
Yeah, there was an immediate split. Some actors publicly distanced themselves, said they wouldn't work with Israel or Israeli projects. But significantly, the analysis pointed out that many of the major producers, the people who actually greenlight and finance films, came out quickly with strong statements of support.
Ah, so the money and power centers reacted differently.
It seems so. It shows that for every public denunciation, there are often deeper, perhaps more resilient connections in key economic and creative industries. The picture is complex.
Okay, this leads us to what the analysis calls the core irony of European defense. The Spain example was just perfect.
Oh, the warship incident. Classic political theater. Spain's leader, Pedro Sanchez, sends a naval vessel to essentially escort or defend a flotilla protesting against Israel. Pure symbolic opposition.
But the punchline.
The punchline is that the cannons mounted on that very Spanish warship were made in Israel.
You're kidding.
Nope. It perfectly captures the massive disconnect between the political signaling isolating Israel and the practical reality of national security.
And this isn't just about cannons, is it? The reliance goes deeper, especially with modern threats.
Much deeper. Think about the threat Europe faces right now, particularly from Russia's use of drones in Ukraine. These things are cheap, they're numerous, they can overwhelm traditional air defenses.
So what's the effective defense against that?
The most effective proven defense system against rockets, drones, missiles like that, it's the Iron Dome, or systems derived from that Israeli technology. Israel is at the forefront of developing and battle testing these systems.
So if European countries politically isolate Israel, maybe even sanction arms sale?
They are strategically disarming themselves against a very real, very current threat. The political desire to isolate directly contradicts their fundamental national security needs. It's shooting themselves in the foot, strategically speaking.
So the logic follows that if political isolation today means vulnerability tomorrow, that isolation can't hold indefinitely. Necessity has to win out eventually.
That's the core geopolitical calculation, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it leads directly to the really big what if. What happens if Israel gets pushed too far into this corner? What new alliances might form out of necessity?
The analysis floats a really provocative idea, an alliance between Israel and Taiwan. Is there any history there?
Well, there's speculation, rumors from the past. Back in 1973, there was this thing called Project Vela. It's unconfirmed, but believed by some to have been an atomic test, resulting from secret cooperation between three nations that were all isolated at the time: Israel, apartheid South Africa, and Taiwan.
Wow. 3 pariah states pooling resources.
If the rumor is true, yes, it suggests a historical precedent. Isolated powers with unique, critical capabilities might find common cause for mutual deterrence.
And today, the assets those two, Israel and Taiwan, could bring together would be immense.
Immense and incredibly complementary. If the West, meaning the U.S. and Europe, keeps pushing Israel away, an alliance with Taiwan starts to look not just possible, but maybe strategically logical for both.
What does each bring?
Israel brings its undeclared but widely assumed advanced nuclear capability, plus world-leading cyber warfare and defense technology. Taiwan brings TSMC near-total global dominance in advanced semiconductor manufacturing.
Chips and nukes. That's a powerful combination.
Staggering. It would create a new geopolitical center of gravity. Imagine an alliance controlling the world's chip supply and possessing advanced nuclear deterrence. It would force everyone, especially China, to completely recalculate.
China, which desperately needs Taiwanese chips but also claims Taiwan?
Exactly. An Israeli nuclear umbrella, even implicitly, over Taiwan. That changes Beijing's calculus entirely. So, ironically, the very policy of isolation designed perhaps to control Israel could ultimately push it into an alliance that makes it more strategically independent, powerful than ever.
As we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's just quickly touch on the current situation in Gaza, since that's the immediate trigger for so much of this. What's the status?
Well, the operation is still ongoing, and it's been notably slow, intentionally so, according to Israeli statements.
Why slow?
The stated reasons are twofold: to try and minimize casualties, both civilian Gazan and their own soldiers in dense urban fighting, and also to create more opportunities or pressure for Hamas fighters to surrender. Though, obviously, that slow pace comes at a cost in terms of time and international criticism.
And the reality on the ground, is Hamas collapsing?
It's hard to say definitively from the outside, but the estimates are still significant, maybe 15,000 fighters left, dug into extensive tunnel networks. And critically, reports continue of Hamas publicly executing alleged collaborators within Gaza.
Which suggests...
It suggests that their control, or at least the fear they inspire, persists within parts of the population. It underscores that dismantling the organization entirely is likely a very long, very difficult task. The path forward there remains incredibly fraught.
So pulling it all together, the main takeaway from Mookie Tenenbaum's analysis seems to be that this ethical, political isolation, however intense it feels now, it might be quite fragile. It might not last if it clashes too hard with the core security and economic needs of the countries doing the isolating.
Yeah, that seems to be the core tension. Nations can vote against Israel at the UN, they can make condemnatory statements, but if their digital economy runs on chips, Taiwan controls, and their cities need Israeli-developed tech to stay safe from drones, well, reality has a way of asserting itself.
Like the South Africa-Taiwan chip example.
Exactly. When push came to shove, the economic necessity of chips trumped the diplomatic pressure from China. Similar dynamics are likely simmering beneath the surface here. Political stances might eventually have to bow to strategic or economic reality when a certain tipping point is reached.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Our dive into the analysis suggests this current isolation isn't just a simple reaction to the conflict. It's tangled up with history, with deep-seated issues, and maybe critically, with the self-interest of major powers like the U.S. possibly wanting to keep Israel in a state of dependency.
We saw the irony with Spain condemning Israel while using its weapons.
It forces you to look past the headlines, past the rhetoric, and really consider the underlying calculations of security and self-interest.
Which brings us to our final thought.
Right. Our final provocative thought for you to mull over. If global security, if national survival, increasingly depends on specific, highly concentrated technological and military assets, things like advanced chips from Taiwan, anti-drone systems from Israel, how long can purely political isolation hold firm when it directly conflicts with the nation's need to protect itself?
That clash between moral positioning and existential necessity. That feels like the real geopolitical stress test of this era.
A test whose outcome could reshape alliances for decades. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.